100 years ago, there was a house in occupied Vietnam known for lavish feasts, soirees, and an unrivaled collection of characters. For France and the colonies, those were the days known as the Belle Epoque, where the French cultural renaissance met the magic mystery of Southeast Asia. For society's elite, it was a time unlike any other. A time that's long forgotten after generations of wars, rebellion, and the passing of the decades. But here, in a house in downtown Bangkok, well, those days never ended. Here, hidden in a courtyard off a busy street, we found ourselves the guests at a dinner party, one that spanned 3 countries, 2 continents, and lasted more than a century. And we're unraveling the story of the remarkable woman responsible for all of it. Someone known to everyone simply as Madame Suzanne. Alright, before we start, I want to explain why we're here. It's been a year of this channel, and if I had to explain the kind of videos that we make, it usually fits into 3 categories. There's the history stuff, the exploration kind of stuff, and then other. Those might actually be the videos that I enjoy the most, when someone we run into in a bar or meet at their restaurant tells us a story so incredible that it just deserves to be recorded. To be preserved by someone, and at the very least, well, we have a camera. This is that kind of video. There's nothing groundbreaking in the next half an hour. There's no shocking twist or answer to some question you've been pondering. But what there is a story unlike any we've ever encountered. A story worth telling. And it begins more than 100 years ago in a place at the time called French Indochina. Our story starts in a province called Vinh Long in the Mekong Delta, southwest of Saigon, in a home so famous in Vietnamese society it would be given the address 1, and when telephones came, that would also be the number. The house at 1 Vinh Long was traditional, full of old Vietnamese character, a place of culture and art, and most of all, cuisine. The matriarch of the family, a woman of high Vietnamese birth named Lam Ngoc Thanh, was a renowned philanthropist and raconteur, and even one of the founders of a religion called Cao Dai, which today has more than 6 million followers. But Mrs. Lam had one love above all else, and that was her only granddaughter. Born in 1917 and given the name Doan Ngoc Hoa. Mrs. Lam doted on her granddaughter, and as she grew up, charming and beautiful, well, to her grandmother, even the emperor himself wasn't good enough for her hand in marriage.
My mother's story is that, number 1, she was the only daughter of one of the wealthiest family of Vietnam. So she had a life of a princess, really. As she grew up, the Emperor Bao Dai, who was a playboy, the French wanted him to get married because they wanted him to have an image, a serious emperor. So he was introduced to many, many girls, and one of the girls whom they chose was my mother. And so my mother was supposed to go to the palace, the imperial palace, to meet Bao Dai. But then my great-grandmother refused. She said, no, if he wants to come to our house, we have the red carpet. We have, because in those days, you know, VIPs have umbrellas, gold umbrellas. We have all 2,000 sets of silverwares. So he comes here and asks me if he is willing to see her. So she was refused. My great-grandmother refused to let her go.
On the other side of the French colony of Indochina, in a city called Vientiane, lived a man named Jean-Jacques Dauplay, the governor of colonial Laos. Monsieur Dauplay was, like Mrs. Lam, a child of the Belle Epoque, a voracious reader and intellectual who spoke 7 languages and surrounded himself with the finer things. But his assignment was to keep order in the colony, and keep order he did. Mr. Dauplay had little tolerance for dissent or any notion of independence, and whenever he'd even sniff a rebellion, he'd tend to the matter himself, keeping his pistol and his bayonet close at hand at all times. And even when he wasn't stabbing or shooting troublemakers, he liked nothing more than showing off his skills with a weapon, going on hunts in the Laotian jungle and making, shall we say, pleasure stops along the way.
You know, in those days, it's not like it is now. He was supposed to be someone important. You know, the French were the masters, then colonialists, so masters. So what happened was that wherever he went, he traveled along on elephant back, because more than 100 years ago there was no horse, no nothing. And it was the custom that wherever he went, in any village, being accordingly an important man, they would give a virgin to him. So I heard that he had many wives along the way, and officially my grandfather has 5 children, but when my brother went back to the southern part of Laos, he said many of the kids there look very much like you.
So who was your father?
Who was my father? Who? Big question. Who was he? How could I explain to you in 2 words?
Take as long as you need.
Okay, his father was the governor of Laos, who married to a Laotian lady, and he grew up in Laos, to Saigon also, because Saigon was very French. He went to school there and also went to France to further his studies, right? So who was he? So when he came back, he was introduced by my grandfather then, right, to the ambassador of Bangkok, the French ambassador to Bangkok. Okay, and in those days, right, to do a job in Chiang Rai. But he was to do what otherwise? So my grandfather, his father, who knew the ambassador, said, "Come on, could you find him a job?" He said, "Yeah, there's a job, East Asiatic in Chiang Rai. It's about wood and all that." My father loved it, and so this is how he all started his years in Thailand. But then, meanwhile, in Vietnam, my mother's grandmother passed away, and she was this is something else, all right? It's a big lady, and my grandfather was supposed to fly and represent France, but my father went there instead to represent the governor, right? So from there, my father started his life, changed his total life from Thailand to Vietnam. How and why? Because by going to Vietnam during that ceremony, you know, as he walked through the line, the procession of the funeral, let's say, he with his white suit, black tie, hat, was very handsome, and my mother very beautiful. So whenever their eyes met, it was love at first bite. So we got married.
Doan Ngoc Hoa and Jean Dauplay would marry in 1938 and would raise a young family at number 1 Vinh Long. Within 8 years, they had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. At first, their life was idyllic, one of a close-knit family, now 4 generations together under one roof. But that wouldn't last. because a new rebellion was brewing in Indochina and Ho Chi Minh set his sights on targeting the son of the oppressive Laotian governor, who just happened to be living at the most prominent address in South Vietnam.
I was born in Vietnam, in the province of Vĩnh Long, and we lived there until 1946, when the Vietnamese started invading the provinces, because they were pursuing the people who had connections with the French.
It's 1946 and French Indochina has fallen apart. The French, weakened by World War II, have overseen a territory crippled by food shortages and occupied twice by the Japanese. Now, attempting to retake their colonial possession, the French were met with fierce resistance from the Vietnamese communists. Negotiations between the two sides would break down and a war would begin, which would ultimately last until 1954. The famous house at No. 1 Vinh Long would be sacked by the Communist Army, looking for the family of Governor Dauplay. The mausoleum would be desecrated, an act which, according to local custom, meant the family would be cursed to live a scattered life and to never return home again. And by then, Jean Dauplay, his wife, now known as Suzanne, and their 5 children were already on a boat, a month on the water heading to France.
It took us a month, and we have smallpox. So what happened was that one started smallpox, afterwards all the 5 children caught it, so they put us way, way down at the bottom of the boat for nearly 3 weeks. So I didn't see much of all the stations that we stopped by. But when we arrived, we were all right. But it was, for us, was very, very long, because we were not allowed to see anybody, because it's a very infectious disease. We ended up in Marseille in the snow. We never seen snow in our lives. So we rushed the snow, ate the snow, because we've never seen it. And in Vietnam, you know, they sort of have ice with the syrup. So we rushed to it and we tried to eat the snow. People were laughing at us. I remember that so vividly.
First of all, my father was very strict, not severe, but strict with us. And although we were three boys, 2 girls, every Sunday he would say, everybody must do the same thing. You go and get olives, pick olives, boys and girls, as much as you could. And then we go to the, to the mill, you call it, to the moulin, to have the olives pressed. And you each will get pocket money, depending on how much each of you get. Of course, the boys would get much more than the girls, you know, because they pack the kilos were heavier, right? And so this is what we would do that.
When we arrived in France, my mother had all the 5 children already. She didn't have to be tied down with the kids. But we went to France. We were not, well, you could consider us refugees, but we're not refugees in the name of refugees like you see nowadays, going there with nothing. We had all our possessions. She carried all the diamonds, the gold and everything from my great-grandmother. But when she arrived there, she completely changed, because she realized that she was a beautiful woman then. Before that, she was maybe a young girl or teenager, married young. And when she arrived there, she was a real femme fatale. And she realized that. And she really used it to the utmost of her ability to use her charm. And she charmed everybody. She got a suite at the Georges V on the Rue Charon, and lived there, had a convertible car after the war when people were living on rations. And she even had a chauffeur with a uniform, with gloves and hats, you know, the kepi. And she went around all the stations in France with her lover. She had a lover who looked very much like the Emperor Bao Dai, and he passed himself as the Emperor Bao Dai.
Well, first of all, because of her beauty, and don't forget, she was wealthy also in France. So in Paris, she would stay, like I think my sister have mentioned, she stayed at Georges V, Rue Charon, and Madame stayed in the street. And you know, when you live there, people start to know you. And then she's opened a restaurant with blue machine, with Chinese, with what you call blue and white, everything antique, with silverwares, with so it had to be known, right? So Madame Dauplay became very well known in Paris. Then she bought herself a Buick. Then she would come to Nice to visit us in Buick, with a chauffeur, with with gloves. So Madame was Madame.
What led to your mother opening her restaurant?
Oh, because she's crazy. she's a. I'm sorry, you cut this out. My mother is a phenomenal. People will say, "Hey, Suzanne, open a restaurant. Shall we do that?" Okay, let's do it. See, so on the spur, she would say, "All right, let's do it." But she brought in. When we left Vietnam, we did not leave as refugees, because she brought tons of jewelry and money and blah blah blah. So, all right, let's open. Since she's not a businesswoman. You give her 100,000 today, tomorrow no more. And we ask her, where's the money, Mama? I don't know. So she's that kind of woman.
It's 5 o'clock and the team at Le Dalat is hard at work preparing for dinner service. It's not quite routine. I mean, nothing's ever routine for the family that owns the restaurant. But it is down to a science after 38 years open. Much of the staff here since the very beginning. The few people left who remember how dining was supposed to be in the days of Madame Suzanne.
This is a place where you really, take your time to enjoy the food here. The atmosphere, or the company that you come with. And I think it's something that you seldom find nowadays.
Today, it's the late summer of 2023, almost 75 years after Madame Suzanne opened her first restaurant, serving the elegant dishes of South Vietnam on the streets of Paris during the country's post-war revival. But everything here, well, it all goes back to those very first years abroad when she found her calling recreating her grandmother's famous dinner parties.
The food here is made with heart and soul. I can still feel my grandmother's spirit, around me, literally. But yes, she has given herself, completely to this place, and the food that you taste here is authentic. I mean, in every sense of the word, and it's home cooked, because that's how she started, and I think. I would say that even back in Vietnam nowadays, you might not find this kind of authenticity.
The path from number 1 Vinh Long to the streets of Paris and finally this courtyard on Bangkok Sukhumvit 23, well, it would take quite a few more turns along the way. And so, before we eat, we have to return to the story. For the 5 children of Jean and Suzanne Dauplay, the time in France was formative. They lived in the country for 8 marvelous years, Madame in Paris, carousing in her convertible and running her restaurant. The rest of the family in Nice, at a mansion provided free of charge by President Charles de Gaulle in honor of the family's service. But France was Jean's father's country, not his own. Home was still Vietnam. So in 1954, they returned to Saigon, only to find the country decimated by a decade of war and occupation. So they left, first to Vientiane, and then in search of work, to Bangkok.
The Prime Minister asked my father, because he spoke 7 languages, English, Thai, he writes them. He writes Vietnamese, Thai, French, English, Chinese. So he said, hey, Dauplay, we need you in Bangkok to open an airline called Epilogue. So this is the reason why we moved to Bangkok then.
Having grown up in other places, what was your first reaction to Thailand when you came here?
I found such a country bumpkin place. When I arrived there, I had one wish to leave it right away. I could not stand it. I could not stand it at all because it was so backward after France, after Vietnam, after Saigon, even after Vientiane. And we were living next to the canal. People were taking a shower, taking bath in the canal, where the Silom is. All along that was a canal. So we thought it was so smelly.
My father had a teacher coming to the house to teach us Thai. And he sent us to school, in St. Joseph's School in Bangkok for 2 years. And I ran out of school after 2 years because I couldn't stand it anymore. Because it really was like E.T. being up there, and everybody was looking at you. Like my sister and I, we didn't have the uniform yet. And they were looking at us saying, what are these two?
No one could understand us. We only spoke French. So my father was really desperate. We didn't know what to do. So he inquired about all the schools here. The only school that spoke some French were the Order of the Saint Vincent de Paul, was a St. Joseph convent. So that's how we continued a little bit of our French dictations and compositions, through the nuns that were here already in those days for 30 or 40 years. Very old-fashioned, very, very old-fashioned. So we had to kneel to go to see them because the Thai system, you cannot surpass their head, it's very impolite. And you see, for us, we're a little French educated, going on the knees. You only go on your knees to God. You bend only to God.
In the years after the family's arrival in Bangkok, both of Suzanne's daughters, Liliane and Laurence, at first tried to find a way to go back overseas. In the end, for Liliane, just weeks away from starting a job in New York with the United Nations, she instead accepted a marriage proposal from a very persistent Chinese-Thai textile merchant, a man named Pongsak Asakul. They would marry on New Year's Eve 1963 and are today less than 4 months away from their 60th anniversary. Laurence in 1958 was accepted into college at George Washington University, and she too was just weeks away from moving abroad when she found herself offered a position at Doan Ngoc Airport in VIP services for Air France. Swept up in a world of first-class travel, good wine, and champagne dinners, she elected to stay, much to the chagrin of her father, who wanted her to go to college. Over the following decades, the Dauplay family would put down roots and Thailand would become home. The children would have children of their own, born in Bangkok and knowing only the stories of the family's roots.
I went back to Saigon several times after, after it became modern, after they allowed to have visas there. And I passed by the house I live in. It was 16 Rue Duitan. Duitan is very near the cathedral. And I was heartbroken because I could not even stop the tricycle and have a look at it and tell my grandchild, you see, this is your grandma's bedroom, because one of this military guy came out and said, get out, get out. So the tricycle had to hurry out. And I just want to sit there and then reminisce about the room, what we did when we were young. There were 2 trees we planted on both sides. One was a longan tree, the other one was a jackfruit. And so those memories still remain, but Saigon has changed a lot.
So before 75, we would go to the Vietnamese embassy where they have the best Vietnamese pho soup, the Vietnamese soup, the pho. You know that one. Of course you know, okay? It was the best. But in those days, don't forget, there was no traffic. So every morning we would go there, and they would have it for the staff. And they have other small Vietnamese food for the staff. So we would go there and have our breakfast there. But then when in 75, the embassy closed, I was like a pregnant woman. I was dying, longing for that soup, that pho. So I started to try to do it myself, make it myself. Every day I would ask how to do it, until it took me about 3 years before I really had it done. My way or not, but anyway, it's what it is today, okay? So I would start doing it. My friend would say, "Oh, Laurence, it's pretty good. Can you do one and do at home for us?" "Yeah, okay, let's do it." Until I opened a small restaurant. I thought I would open a small restaurant of 5 tables, just for the heck of it, for fun. And this is how it all started. So I opened a restaurant with 5 tables, and until it became very famous, and until I couldn't handle it anymore, and until we had to ask my mom to come over and help. But she, being so professional, she's the one who introduces all the menu that you see, that you have today.
My mother was a very whimsical person, and she has a gift for cooking and delivering wonderful, wonderful, tasty food, just inborn. And she just wanted to open a restaurant, but none of us are really in a restaurant business. And what we did was that she wanted so much to open it, so my husband said, why don't we go and look for some kind of dilapidated houses around this area, and then we'll start a restaurant for you. That's how we started.
I always knew that that was my grandmother's wish, to open a Vietnamese restaurant, and I guess it was the right opportunity when she came back to Asia, or to Thailand, and then my mom and my aunt thought, let's find her something to do, and let's make her dream come true. So they ended up, opening a restaurant together. Yeah.
Dalat is because when my mother started this restaurant, we didn't know how to name it, and then the movie Dalat was very popular then. J.R. and Sue Allen or whatever. I don't know whether you're born then, but anyway, maybe you must be a young teenager. But anyway, and everybody was crazy about this movie on the television. So my mother said, "Oh, why do we call it Dalat? Because everybody knows already pronounced Dallas. So if you say Dallas, it's very much like Dalat, like Dallas. So it's already on their lips. So let's call it Dalat." And Dalat means, it's a town in the plateau in South Vietnam. So it exists actually, Dalat.
I was my mother's, assistant always, because I love cooking. Okay, a bit like you. Okay, I love to cook. So when my mother's doing it, she said, "Laurence, come and help, or come see me." So I was doing it with her. So to change her recipe, she said, no. You're not allowed to change one bit. And so we've never changed any of her recipes.
Oh, she is, I would say, she is the figurehead behind. Without her, it would have never been successful. She was everything a restaurant could hold: a raconteur, a good cook, good entertainer, hilarious, full of joke, full of life. I mean, none of us resemble her.
It was full of bubbles, because the minute she would enter a room, it's totally different. It's like, a Christmas tree. Lighting, because she was the soul of the restaurant. She would go to every table and she would talk to everybody, and everybody loved her.
This was like her theater, you know, for her to come to the restaurant every day, you know, to perform in a way, but you know, in her authentic way, and to meet, you know, guests and customers. That was, you know, I could tell how much she enjoyed it, you know, and it's something that she, you know, continued to. She loved doing that until the very end, you know.
Your family designed this room for your mother, is that right?
Yes, we take the color so that it's a warm color for her, and I put all the pictures to make her feel that this is her room. And of course, I managed to get all the pictures of her since her young days with her mother. And this is the time when she went to France and became la femme fatale. This is femme fatale. She already had 5 kids, and that's the time when she was living already in Georges V. When we disembarked in France, that was in the Jardin Albert Ier in Nice. In those days, they were very elegant. People were wearing white suits, you know, linen white suits, and that's how she fell in love with my father. Because when he appeared in the doorway, he was wearing a white linen suit with a polka dot tie and a Panama hat. She said she fell in love with that appearance.
Jean Dauplay would live to the age of 100, passing away in the year 2005. After his death, Suzanne remained independent, living alone just a block from Le Dalat, busying herself with the restaurant, spending every evening watching the cooks and entertaining customers, even as her own health began to fail. Her daughters, Liliane and Laurence, would both move into apartments on the same block, with Liliane's own children, Patrick and Mickey, raising their own families nearby. By the time Madame Suzanne herself died in 2014 at the age of 97, she left a hole at this restaurant that could never quite be filled. Mickey, a graduate of Brown University and the London School of Economics, well, he'd leave his executive job to spend his nights polishing silverware and running orders at Le Dalat. And the food and the decor and the elegance has remained, the spirit of the Belle Époque surviving, even after the last member of the family to actually live it no longer did. But the fact that Mickey took the role at all and spends his evenings surrounded by family and close friends, well, that itself speaks to perhaps the greatest legacy of Madame Suzanne. And that's the fact that even after fleeing her home country, surviving 2 world wars, decades of conflict and turmoil, and all the cataclysmic changes of the 20th century, she still managed to find a way to rebuild what she lost all those years ago. The soul of the Paris of the East, a place where family and friends stay and drink wine and pastis, where taste and elegance still mean something and where every detail is exactly right, even without Madame Suzanne.
You know, we have to be realistic that no one can ever really fill her shoes. But what I can try to do is to try to keep her legacy going, you know, and you know, we have her photos in the restaurant, and at least it gives me a chance to tell people about her, you know, that, you know, how the restaurant came about, you know, who are the main personality behind it all, you know, how it all started.
I have to ask you this. I don't think we're going to use this in the video, but I need to ask you. Tell me about the bathroom.
Which one?
The famous one, the men's room.
Oh, my.
That I think it's really, it's our little secret.
The legendary bathroom, again. Yes, let me tell you. Because I was doing a lot of interior decorating, freelance, okay? So what I did when we did this bathroom was that I thought, what shall I do with bathroom? Let me think of something different.
Because, it's something that just blows people away. Because they come in, they see this quite traditional restaurant, very understated, and it seems like nothing can go wrong. And then the minute they walk into the men's room, it's like, oh, it took them to a whole different world.
We thought it was fun. It started because somebody went abroad and brought back one of those, you see, funny thing. And I kept it for a while, and I thought, well, since I have a very funny, how do you call the urinoir, where it's funny shape, and I said, well, I'm going to add this one on top so that at least it's self-explanatory.
At home, my sister bought me from Bali one of those wooden, what do you call it? It was a hanger with a...
And then slowly we build it up. Whenever I saw something a little bit risque, I would, okay, I'll put it in, add it on. But the worst one was not done by me, okay? Not done by me. I just added up.
So I thought, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to order some big, some small, some there, and I'm going to hang it on the ceiling. Then somebody told me, oh, no, Laurence, no. In Thailand, you can't do that. Oh, the Thai people would not want to have that on their head. You see, you know what I mean? It's because at first I really thought of having some long, some short on the ceiling. And this is when they told me, Nana, don't do that. So, but I've ordered them already, so what could I do?
I think it's the spirit of my grandmother in a way, that she's that kind of lady that she's very fun to be with, and she will always have this side of to her life that's kind of funny.
Subscribe to the channel for more from OTR. Please consider supporting us on Patreon. It's how we keep this going. And thank you so much to those who do. Please check the links below for our Instagram and social media, and we'll see you next week.